Hi, we're here to talk to you about the CZU Complex Fire. My name is Finn.
I'm Tristan.
I'm Lila.
I'm Allison.
And I'm Samantha.
So we're going to start off by talking about the ecosystem and the location of the fire. So the regions that the fire was started was in Santa Cruz Mountains and San Mateo regions. The fire burned from August 16th, 2020 to September 22nd, 2020. It burned all the way up until it almost reached San Jose. And then it got all the way down into Santa Cruz County, and it burned all the way up to UCSC and some of the wildlife natural habitats there.
Now, what was the cause of this fire? The CZU Complex Fire were a group of fires in Santa Cruz County that were active for 37 days. CZU refers to the San Mateo Santa Cruz unit of CAL FIRE that were the main force against the fire in the beginning. The fire started around 3:30 a.m. on August 16th, 2020, from a thunderstorm that released over 11,000 bullets of dry lightning. This lightning storm started hundreds of fires throughout California, seven of which were in the Santa Cruz County. These fires began to merge, becoming even worse and becoming the CZU Complex Fire. Around 2 days after the complex fire first began, the direction of the wind switched and became much more intense, which caused the fire to rapidly expand. Now, what caused the fire to be so destructive and persist for as long as it did? So that summer, and especially August, had been exceptionally dry, hot, and windy, so there was already a concern for wildfires and dry lightning. Incredibly windy conditions on August 19th, as well as multiple red flag days throughout the month, allowed the main spread of the fire. A red flag day or red flag warning means that there's an increased risk of fire danger due to high temperatures, low humidity, and strong winds. 2020, on average, was also reported as the 18th driest year since 1937 in that area. And because it was so hot and dry, the thick underbrush within the redwood forests surrounding the Santa Cruz County dried out, which allowed them to spread fire much quicker and ignite much easier.
So what agencies responded to the fire? The fire was being primarily managed by CAL FIRE. However, over the course of the burn, the fire crossed from a district managed by CAL FIRE into national forest land and threatened the Round Valley Indian Reservation. This brought up questions of jurisdiction and confusion about who was responsible for fighting the fire, which delayed the response. Eventually, CAL FIRE, the National Forest Service, and the Round Valley Tribal Administration worked in conjunction with local sheriffs and fire departments to suppress the fire. The state also received funding from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, to cover some of the costs of fighting the fires, as well as aid and recovery efforts. The Environmental Protection Agency aided by providing household hazardous waste removal and assessments in areas affected by the fire. This shows some of the different local departments on the bottom, as well as the main departments that were influential in fighting this fire on the top.
The impacts that the fire had on the community were that it destroyed historic sites up in the Big Basin Redwood State Park. It destroyed the historic visitor center and numerous ancient trees. This affected the local heritage and tourism dependent economy. For the economic impact, it also destroyed local businesses, and it had considerable downturn for local businesses and tourism, and agriculture and retail. For the recovery costs, rebuilding homes and businesses and infrastructure was substantial. Many residents faced financial challenges due to their high expenses associated with rebuilding and recovery. For the environmental and long-term impact, the wildlife and ecosystem were disrupted, and it destroyed many habitats and created soil erosion and flooding for the post-fire landscape. The environmental damage had long-term implications for agriculture and water quality in the region. This also affected this fire also affected emotional and psychological had a psychological and emotional impact from the displacement and the trauma. The families lost their homes and led to significant emotional and psychological stress. Many families were placed in the city of Santa Cruz, and they were allowed to stay at the local hotels and motels. And the community, in response, provided mental health and support through local organizations and government agencies to work and help the residents cope with the aftermath of the fire.
So what were the monetary costs and the costs on life from the fire? Well, during the time that the CZU Complex Fire occurred, there were 585 other wildfires burning in California. There's a sheer lack of resources to fight the fire efficiently, which meant that resources had to be found outside of California. Also, the COVID pandemic added to the state of disarray. The state fund used for fighting wildfires had already been nearly depleted due to almost 600 other wildfires during the season. Only 90 crews were deployed to the CZU fire due to the low budget compared to the 190 that could have been deployed if regular funds were available. The total monetary cost of fighting the fire ended up being $68 million. As for the cost of life, the CZU Complex Fire burned 86,509 acres, the majority of which were redwood forests. About 97% of Big Basin Redwoods State Park was burned, and 1,490 structures were completely burned to the ground. There was reported to be one non-fatal injury and one death due to the fire. The death was a man who was too stubborn to leave his home and thought he could water down his perimeter to save his house. So what policies were changed or impacted because of the fire? Well, policies were strengthened to enforce stricter vegetation clearance around properties, particularly in high-risk wildfire areas. This included mandatory defensible space inspections and increased penalties for noncompliance. There is increased emphasis on controlled burns and other fuel reduction methods to manage forest density and reduce the amount of combustible material. The fire highlighted the need for better emergency notification systems. As a result, enhancements were made to the wireless emergency alerts and the addition of more localized alert systems to ensure timely and accurate information dissemination during emergencies. Investments were made to improve evacuation routes, including road widening and better signage to facilitate smoother and quicker evacuations. Local governments worked on refining evacuation plans, ensuring that they are well communicated and practiced throughout the regular drills. Building codes were revised to require the use of fire-resistant materials in new constructions and significant renovations, particularly in wildfire-prone areas. Land use policies were updated to limit development in high-risk wildfire areas, encouraging more fire-resilient community planning. Increased funding and resources were allocated for firefighting efforts, including additional equipment, training, and personnel. And finally, policies were put in place to address post-fire erosion control, watershed protection, and reforestation efforts to mitigate long-term environmental damage.
So what sort of prevention measures might have worked to reduce the impact of the fire? So as mentioned before, the CZU fire complex started by natural causes. Severe thunderstorms produced lightning strikes and struck Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties. This area was already experiencing dryness and drought, which led to a higher risk of the fire starting. And as days went by, the intensity of the fire grew due to high winds. So even though this fire started from natural causes, some prevention measures that might have worked to reduce the impact of the fire or just any type of fire in general is understanding the fire. Basically just enabling the identification of the fire and how the fire started and how the fire is behaving, and just targeting strategies for risk reduction. And looking at the fire triangle, we can use the oxygen, the heat, and the fuel, and just looking at the characteristics of the fire as a whole. Next is preventative measures. This can include community involvement, such as evacuation and fire prevention programs, and just precautions in general. And then also reducing vegetation. We can reduce crowded trees and shrubs, have a fire-resistant landscape, and create a fire-resistant zone.
Thank you very much for listening to our presentation.